Hey all, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our video review of the Jumper EasyBook 3 Pro. This is an affordable 13.3-inch Ultrabook that sells for $250 despite the construction, which is made entirely out of aluminum and reminds me a lot of the much more expensive MacBook Air. So it has a very premium look and feel at a low price point. Other specifications include 6 gigs of built-in RAM, more than the average that you'll find at this price, which tends to be around 4 gigs. That extra RAM will help you with multitasking and making things run a little bit faster in the day-to-day. However, in terms of processing package, it's fairly typical for the price. We have access to an Intel Celeron N3 450 chipset, which is part of the Apollo Lake family. It's a quad-core chipset that has a maximum speed up to 2.1 gigahertz. It's pretty good for web browsing, for watching HD movies, for some light productivity, but it's not going to be the best if you are doing video editing or more intensive games, things like that. Otherwise, it has a 4,600 milliamp hour capacity battery that will last you for about 6 to 7 hours on a single go. That's pretty average battery life. It's not phenomenal, but it's passable for a workday. Taking a quick look at the design of the laptop first, we have access again to a very beautiful construction. We have these chamfered aluminum edges, and on the side there's access to a full 3.5mm headphone jack, a USB 3.0 port for fast data transfer, and also micro SD for memory expansion up to 128 gigabytes, which you'll probably need because it comes with 64 gigs of eMMC built in. Out of that storage, only about 45 gigs is remaining once the Windows 10 operating system is installed. So if you have lots of movies, lots of songs, and media collections offline, you would want to expand the memory. On the other side, there is a proprietary port for the charger. Now, it takes about 4 hours to completely charge, so it's not the fastest laptop to charge up, and I do wish they would have used USB Type-C or another standard port instead, but it is what it is at this price. There's also another USB 3.0 port and also a micro HDMI port for expanding the screen onto a television set. Before we open up the laptop, let's do a quick size comparison. Again, it's very slim. Here it is next to a Surface, and you can see how they're basically the same exact thickness, despite the fact that the Surface doesn't come with a keyboard attached. So you get an idea of how small this really is. There's that trick that Steve Jobs did with the first MacBook Air, where the entire computer can fit into a vanilla envelope, and this is really no exception. Here it is next to a slightly chunkier Chromebook. It's a Asus Chromebook. You can tell that the Chromebook is significantly larger and chunkier. So this really is something that you will be able to carry nicely in a backpack and travel when on the go. And that really is the target demographic of a fanless, completely silent Ultrabook. Alright, so lifting it up, the hinge itself does not open using just one hand. It's a little bit stiff, so you do need 2 hands to open it up completely, but you do have a very stable overall hinge in the same style as you can see here as the MacBook. On the inside, the aluminum construction continues, and we have a generous 3-inch multi-touch trackpad. In my testing, I found the trackpad to be actually very responsive and easy to use, so I didn't need to plug in a mouse very often at all. It has a matte finish, which adds to a bit of precision. It's not made out of glass, it's made out of plastic, but all the gestures and pinch to zoom that I did worked very well. The keyboard here is a full-size layout. It's an island or a chiclet style keyboard, which offers a pretty tactile responsiveness when you're typing, and it has surprising depth because it is a pretty typical kind of chiclet layout. It's not like the butterfly switches on a newer MacBook, which are much more shallow. So overall, if you're doing a lot of typing, emailing, and document editing on Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, this is a very enjoyable keyboard to use. There's also noise-canceling microphones for video chatting and also some notification lights. Up top, we have access to the 13.3-inch widescreen 16:9 aspect ratio IPS display. The display itself could be a little bit brighter, but overall I found that it had very good viewing angles, and because it is a matte surface as opposed to glossy, it also doesn't attract too many fingerprints. In addition, when there's a bit of lighting in the background, or if you're using it outdoors, it still remains fairly visible, so that is a plus. You also have access to a 2-megapixel webcam on the top that slightly protrudes from the edge of the Surface, as you can see there. But overall, it actually works surprisingly well for video chatting and does a good job of streaming HD videos when you're chatting using Skype. As a whole, again, the design language of the laptop is premium. It doesn't look cheap at all, and the bezels are incredibly slim and small, which again matches 2017-2018 laptop designs in general. So quite impressive from the design perspective. Now, booting things up, we have access to a very typical layout of Windows 10 Home Edition. It's a very clean install without any extras or bloatware on board. You have access to 2.4G and 5G dual band wireless, so as far as Wi-Fi reception, I found that it was quite strong. There's also Bluetooth 4.0 if you want to connect to wireless speakers or other peripherals. Even though Chrome will give you slightly less battery endurance than Microsoft Edge, I still find it to be a little faster in day-to-day use when I'm browsing the web, as well as watching back movies, and of course, since it's made by Google, it supports services like YouTube a little bit better. I switch over to Microsoft Edge here just for demonstration purposes. You can see it also works pretty well, and loading speeds are actually fairly speedy. Once the page is loaded, it takes about 5 seconds to completely load. You can see that scrolling and rendering is fast, fluid, and responsive with not too much lag or delay. This is, again, a page that has many moving elements and many kind of scrolling elements, so it's actually handled pretty well on this particular processor. Pinch to zoom, you can see, is also very fluid on the touchpad. In fact, I would say one of the best attributes of the Jumper EasyBook Pro 3 would be the keyboard and touchpad combo. I just find the touchpad to be really satisfying, and it has a nice click to it as well that is very tactile, responsive, and has a very premium kind of a sound and feedback to it, and just makes the entire experience feel solid and precise. The keyboard, same thing. You get a very reasonable words per minute using it. It's wide, it's generous, it's tactile, and again, for typing and emailing, it really is one of the best parts of this particular setup. So again, web browsing works pretty well. So let's go over to a movie watching test. I have a YouTube tab opened up, and we get a opportunity to listen to the speakers. Now, one thing about the Ultrabook layout is you don't have dedicated keys just for media controls like play, pause. They basically take up the same space as the function keys. So you have to tap on function and then F2 or F3 if you want to adjust the volume. The keyboard, the speaker on the EasyBook 3 Pro are mounted on the back. You can see this is what it looks like. There's also a compartment for you to access the RAM. There's rubber feet that prevents the unit from sliding around, very similar to a MacBook, but you can see they have left and right speakers located there. If you have it on a flat surface like a wood desk, it actually kind of bounces off the surface and makes the sound amplified in a way. So it sounds actually quite loud and nice. But if it's on your lap, it gets more easily muffled up. So it's not the best placement. I would still prefer speakers mounted on the surface of the keyboard, but that it is what it is. So playing back the clip here. And here's what it sounds like without the desk vibrating it. Alright, so pausing the track, you can hear that the sound quality is actually pretty good. It's, again, packs sufficient volume. Not a lot of bass, so you're not going to really hear too much in terms of the bass drop, as well as instruments like a cello. But overall, it does a good job for playing back some quick songs, as well as watching some movies. You get a better experience plugging in your own headphones, of course, but for built-in speakers on such a thin and inexpensive laptop, it actually works surprisingly well. So the performance is expected. It's a quad-core chipset, but I would say it's closer to something like a Intel Atom, slightly faster than that, but not too significantly. The RAM here with 6 gigs obviously helps make the experience seem a little bit faster than normal, but it isn't quite as fast as something like an Intel Core M or a Core i series laptop, so make sure that you keep your expectations in line there. But overall, again, for these regular apps as well as some light web browsing, it handles them without too many issues. All right, so let's jump into the camera performance next. I'm just going to open up the webcam here, and tapping on this, we just have a very simple kind of interface. The webcam here doesn't have the widest field of view, but it does work actually again pretty well even under low light environments, and you can see that overall for some very quick chatting applications, Immordin does the job. You can also record video up to again HD quality, and tapping on the settings here I can also play around with some of these other adjustments. I've taken a few images as samples with the camera, and you can take a closer look here. It is a fixed focus lens as opposed to autofocus, but it actually does again do a reasonable job for a low cost laptop. This is the quality that you can expect if you are playing around with the camera here. So again, definitely a passable camera. Those are the essentials, I would say, of this laptop. If we go into the taskbar here, again, we have a very typical Windows 10 setup. You can see that scrolling and these navigational tasks are fairly fluid and responsive. We have all the basic utilities on board, such as an alarm clock that you can set. There's also, of course, calculators, and there's, of course, also Paint, Maps, which uses their own proprietary software there. You can also play back movies, of course, and there's also news if you want to look at a blink feed-like interface that can pick up all the news channels that you're reading. There's also, again, People, Skype, which has been pre-installed, and weather apps, things like that. You can see here that once we have a few applications open, including some tabs in the browser and some of these utility apps, there is a little bit more slowdown. The RAM does a good job as far as making things still feel snappy when you're switching between the apps, but once you have lots of apps open, each individual app might run a little more slowly because, again, the processor isn't going to be lightning fast. Overall, though, you can see that the interface is pretty fun, it's fluid, and these tiles also give you an insight on how the device would look if you switch over to tablet view, which wouldn't make too much sense on this particular unit since there is no touchscreen, but here we have a more Metro-like experience if you prefer this with larger icons. Of course, you can download some mobile titles as well through the Microsoft Store if you want to pick up a recipe app for cooking. There's also Minecraft, Asphalt 8 for racing, and all of these titles run fairly smoothly as long as you have other tabs and larger apps closed when you open them up. They're mobile games and they run well on this particular chipset and processing package, but not anything too different from what the experience would be like on a similar mid-end tablet running on Android. But you do have these options. For PC-specific games and more demanding titles are not going to work quite as well. This is by no means a gaming PC, and you can tell because the GPU is integrated. It's Intel 500 series GPU. That's it's not a dedicated one specifically handling the graphics processing. So it's not very powerful at all for demanding titles. If you turn down the frame rates, if you turn down the resolution, things like that, it will still run, but it will seem a little bit choppy. Of course, you do still have all the benefits, however, of a full-blown Windows PC, and that is the ability to, at least on paper, run these legacy apps. So things like Photoshop, for instance, will run without any problems, which are full-blown versions of these programs that were originally designed for Windows, and they work here, of course, a lot better than they would on a watered-down version on Android or iOS. So those are the benefits. You can simply Google something like an app and install it without having to worry about compatibility if you are using a Chromebook, for instance. So again, these are some of the benefits. I also played around with the voice recorder, and I'm going to play back a sample that I recorded earlier.
This is a test of the microphone capabilities of the Jumper EasyBook 3. Test, mic.
Some final remarks. For thermal, it actually remains quite comfortable. There is a little bit of heat built up on the center of the laptop, right around this region when you're working. So if it's on your lap, you'll feel it ever so slightly after, let's say, an hour or two of work. But it still remains fairly comfortable. There's not really it doesn't really get too hot, and the metal surface definitely dissipates the heat. So that's one of the benefits of the very energy efficient Apollo Lake N3 450, is that it doesn't get hot very easily at all. Battery performance on this particular unit, as aforementioned, comes in at around, I would say, 6 hours, 7 hours, depending on what you're doing. If you have Wi-Fi consistently on and you are also opening up Chrome with 8 or 7 tabs, some video files, things like that, it's going to drain a little faster and will last you for about 6 hours, 5 hours, somewhere in between that. So battery life is definitely an area where a Chromebook, especially one with a 720p display as opposed to full 1080p, may last longer. With that being said, this is also pretty average for something in this price range, and in particular with a 1080p panel and this form factor. So that's also something to really quickly keep in mind. So that's been the Jumper EasyBook 3 Pro. Overall, I would say this is an excellent value for the money. At $250, the build is excellent. The display is a highlight, as is the keyboard and the touchpad, which is extremely sensitive, tactile, and responsive. There's even additional software optimization that they built right in here that is called the Touchpad Blocker app that allows you to further adjust things to prevent accidental hits. It's a pretty intelligent software. It's a nice addition so that, if you have some palm resting on the touchpad when you're typing, it prevents the cursor from jumping around randomly. So the touchpad is excellent. The feedback and the software are both really nice, and it makes for a great experience when you're doing Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. For watching HD movies, it also works quite well, and as a combination, the entire package just feels very premium and well put together. You can check out more details about the Jumper EasyBook 3 in our article, but for now, this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews.